So up until now, I don't think you can fairly assess Amorim as to whether he's the man to eventually win United a title. The circumstances have just been horrific. However, over the next few months until the end of the season, there are some things that Amorim should be judged on, and one of them is his willingness to give some of the youth players the opportunities they deserve. I get there's Martinez's injury, Casemiro and Eriksen are essentially useless for his midfield double pivot, and Højlund and Xerxes have far too many weaknesses and limitations in their game to be Amorim's centre forward in the mid to long term. However, this is the point where Amorim needs to make some changes. Being annoyed and frustrated at the lack of current options available is completely valid, but then not giving the youth players who play in those positions the opportunities over players who clearly aren't good enough is not. People will say that it's not the time to throw young players into first team, but I disagree. I think it's a perfect time. The best time to use young players is when the team as a whole and the players in their given roles are underperforming, because otherwise if you have a fully fit, elite level squad ahead of them, realistically they aren't going to get the minutes they need. It's too much of a risk for the coach to drop those players and blood the young players, particularly if United have Champions League or a title to play for in the Premier League. If you think about it, there's actually little to no pressure on youth players coming into the setup at the moment, because the senior players are performing so underwhelmingly that they don't have high standards to live up to, that they otherwise would have in prior seasons, or even in the next few seasons hopefully. And also with United's Premier League campaign essentially being dead, nothing to play for, the pressure around making mistakes is substantially less than if every game going forward was a must-win for a particular objective. And so for me, the big test of Amorim is going to be whether he gives these three players opportunities. So who are these players? Why do I rate them so highly? Why do I think blooding these young players from now to the end of the season is not just necessary in the short term, but something that could transform Amorim's squad in the long term? So the three players who I think should be given opportunities for the rest of the season are Goodwill Kukonki, Sekou Koni and Chido Obi Martin. And the reason why I think they should be promoted to the first team is not just because of their ability, but also because if you look at the positions they would come into play, the squad is in desperate need of new players in those particular positions. Now in this video I'm going to specifically analyse Kukonki, and in separate videos I'll come on to Chido Obi Martin and Sekou Koni, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you do get notified when those videos come out. So Kukonki as a left-sided centre-back to me is a no-brainer with Martinez's injury. If the likes of Yoro, De Ligt, Johnny Evans, Mazraoui or Dalot are being used as a left-sided centre-back and Kukonki doesn't get a sniff for the rest of the season, I'm sorry, but Amorim will now be making exactly the same mistake that we saw Ten Hag make with the likes of Alvaro Fernandez, Oyedele and Camboala. The Premier League is gone. We are likely finishing somewhere between 8th and 14th. There's absolutely no mid to long term benefit to using the five players I've mentioned in Lisandro Martinez's role as a left-sided centre-back, because none of them are going to play there for United going into next season, or hopefully anyway. However, Kukonki might, because he's not just a left-sided centre-back, but I actually think his skill set makes him as big a talent as someone like Lenny Yoro, and for me, the Kukonki situation is a perfect example of United's recruitment team, management, and the fan base prioritising shiny new toys over the toys they've got already at the club, who I think are just as good. We've just signed Ayden Heaven from Arsenal, and the consensus appears to be that he's going to be the one to come into the squad to fill Martinez's absence. But for me, Kukonki is clearly the better player, and the bigger talent. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Heaven isn't capable of developing into a first team player for United, but I think Kukonki's potential should be considered just as high as Yoro. Heaven does have the ability to shift the ball quickly and thread those passes through the centre of the pitch, but when watching Kukonki, I just feel like he's a lot more fluid with his movement on the ball and is a lot more efficient at driving into space when it's presented, and also is better at playing those slightly longer ground passes either up the line or zipped into players between the lines, splitting the opposition's midfield. And when compared against Heaven, or really any other centre-back his age for that matter, Kukonki can be described as what's known as a unicorn player, because by looking at his skill set and profile, he has all the technical, defensive, athletic and physical attributes that you would want in a modern day centre-back, particularly a wide centre-back in a back three, and he's also left-footed as well, which is always a bonus. First of all, despite only being 17 last month, Kukonki is 6'5". Yes, 6'5", an inch taller than Maguire, 2 inches taller than Yoro, and 3 inches taller than Ayden Heaven. Now height doesn't mean that much on its own, if it isn't accompanied by physical and athletic attributes, but I would argue that in both of those areas as well, Kukonki has a natural advantage over the likes of Yoro and Heaven. I mean, for a player so tall, he is absolutely built, being incredibly physically strong, but also very quick across the ground, and I would argue that he's a lot more nimble and fluid than both Euro and Heaven, as when you watch those two it's obvious that they still haven't yet developed their ability to efficiently use their physicality and athleticism together, as often I do think Euro can look quite clunky when he's having to turn quickly and race back towards his own goal, and Heaven as well. I've seen a few times where he can be a bit awkward when adjusting his body positioning inside of the box. Kukonki on the other hand doesn't have these issues. He is literally the perfect profile for defending space in the channel in a high defensive line, as he has the physicality, acceleration over short distances, turning pace and pace over longer distances, as well as being able to use his body to put himself between the player and the ball, but also the tackling technique to race back and put in a firm sliding tackle if needed as well. And not just that, but in possession he is so good when it comes to his technique, first touch, progressive passing and ball carrying, that he has even been used as a left back at times for the under-18s, which is pretty absurd considering he is 6'5". Honestly, if United were building the ideal left-sided centre-back in an AI lab, Kukonki would be pretty close to the final product that you'd want. And that left-sided centre-back, he may also offer Amorim something that even Lisandro Martinez doesn't. But before I break down exactly what that is, a quick reminder, I do have an in-game Instagram group chat where I do provide analysis during the Manchester United games, and we also have discussions on different topics throughout the week. In the lower tier on my Patreon, you can also get access to some of my articles. I've got 2 out this week, one on Luis Campos at AS Monaco, and one on Beppe Marotta at Sampdoria, and how they changed the club's fortunes in the roles that are essentially director of football as you would know it. I've also got a tactical ebook which is on the way, which you will get for free if you are in the group chat. So if you do want to sign up to my Patreon, it would be very much appreciated. I'll leave it linked in all the usual places. So despite Martinez being an integral part of Amorim's system in possession, if you were looking for an upgrade in that role, the thing you would prioritise would be pace and athleticism, as both in and out of possession that is Martinez's weakness. Out of possession, if developed to his full potential, which he obviously isn't at yet, Kukonki would be a superior defender of space in the transition, being a lot quicker and physically strong than Martinez, already at his young age. But we could also see Amorim utilise his in possession. We saw it from Martinez's goal against Liverpool. The movement ahead of play from the wide centre-back essentially gives United a free man during certain phases of play, with the opposition's wide midfielder on that side unlikely to track the run that deep. However, we haven't seen Amorim really give Martinez the licence to join the attack that often on the left side, and that may be due to the fact that Martinez doesn't have the blistering pace to be a serious threat on the under or the overlap. But Kukonki does, and so when playing as a left-sided centre-back rather than being a playmaker in the side, primarily there for his progressive passing and ball circulation, holding a deeper position in the rest defence like Lisandro Martinez, I think Amorim could give Kukonki the licence to join the attack and make those third-man runs ahead of the likes of Dogu or either Garnacho or Mainu on that side. Wherefrom he has shown when he's able to break in behind into a wide position in the final third, he's more than capable of putting in a low cross across the box with his left foot, which is something that neither Heaven or Euro have the ability to do on either side, being the types of wide centre-backs who, like Martinez, are going to hold deeper positions in the rest defence rather than temporarily acting as fullbacks to provide the movement ahead of play. Now obviously Kukonki isn't the finished article, and if he is given sufficient game time in the first team from now till the end of the season, some inconsistencies and weaknesses in his game are going to come to the surface that aren't evident in youth football. But in terms of young players with incredible potential, I can't see how you can rate Euro and Heaven so highly but not put Kukonki in that bracket, as I would argue that if you evaluate each player's natural abilities and overall profiles as wide centre-backs, Kukonki might have the highest potential of the three. And if he were a signing that had cost us £30 million plus, or signed from a rival academy, I think the hype around him would be a lot higher than it currently is. And this is why I think it's imperative that Amorim gives him sufficient minutes from now to the end of the season, as we need to see where he's at in regards to his performance in senior football, almost as a litmus test to allow us to accurately decide what to do with him next season, as it may be the case that he isn't ready and needs a loan, but we can't fully assess him until he gets some minutes. However, I think if he comes in and is able to adapt to senior football, we could potentially solve the issue that we're going to have with Lisandro Martinez out for maybe most of the calendar year without having to spend a huge amount on a replacement. So let me know what you think of Kukonki. I am now working on the videos for Koni and Chido Obi Martin, so subscribe to the channel for that, and if you do want to sign up to my Patreon, I'll leave it on the end screen now.